It always starts the same way. Just you, a couple of friends, and a building no one's set foot in for years. A run-down house with creaking floors. A rotting factory echoing with metal groans. A chapel that should be empty, but isn't. You think you're just exploring forgotten places until they start watching you back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to NightTerrorX. Tonight's episode brings you 3 terrifying stories from people who dared to explore what should have been empty. A mysterious house with more than just cobwebs behind the walls. A factory where the wrong turn nearly became their last. And an old church that held on to something far too real. If you're into unsettling, real horror stories, be sure to like this video, share your own creepy experiences in the comments, or email them to this and maybe, just maybe, we'll feature your nightmare next. Now grab your headphones, and remember some buildings were abandoned for a reason. The house that wasn't empty. So I was talking to my uncle one night, and he said something I'll never forget. Some places don't stay abandoned, they wait. That line stuck with me, especially because of what I went through a couple summers back. There was this forgotten house about a half-mile from where I used to live, not even on Google Maps anymore. People around town said it had been empty since the late 90s. Trees had overgrown the driveway, the mailbox had rusted into dust, and you'd never know it was there unless you were really looking for it. Or like me, stupidly curious. It was the kind of place you'd only hear about in small-town rumors. Kids dared each other to go near it, but nobody actually did. Except me. I had a random Tuesday off work and figured I'd do a bit of exploring. I grabbed my flashlight, tossed a bottle of water and a folding knife into my backpack, and headed out on foot. It wasn't far, and besides, I'd done this kind of thing before with friends. But this time, I went alone. The driveway was barely there anymore, just a dirt path half consumed by weeds and fallen branches. As I pushed through the underbrush, the air felt heavier, not humid, just thick, like something didn't want me there. When I finally saw the house, it was almost surreal. A 2-story wooden structure with chipped paint, sagging shutters, and a collapsed porch roof. It looked like it had been frozen in time, and then slowly rotted from the inside out. I walked up to a shattered window and leaned in, listening. Nothing. Not even the sound of animals. Just silence. I circled to the front. The door was cracked open slightly. I didn't have to push hard. It creaked wide with a groan like the house was exhaling after being disturbed. Inside, it was like stepping into a ghost's living room. Old furniture still sat in place, draped in dust, cobwebs hugging every corner. An ancient rotary phone on a side table. A photo album, water-damaged and curled, lay splayed on the floor like someone dropped it in a hurry. I felt like I was intruding, not just on a space, but on a memory. I wandered around downstairs slowly, flashlight cutting through the gloom. There was a weird smell, wet wood and something sour, not quite rot, not quite mold. The staircase groaned when I stepped on it, threatening to snap with each movement. I made it upstairs carefully, the flashlight trembling in my hand a little more than I'd admit to anyone. There were 2 doors in the narrow hallway. One stood open, and one was closed. I peeked into the open room. It was bare, completely clean. No dust, no cobwebs, no debris. As if someone had just left it this morning. I turned and carefully crept back down the stairs, shining my flashlight everywhere, trying to pierce every shadow. I reached the hallway and bolted for the door, but it was closed, and I know I had left it open. Worse, the handle wouldn't budge. It was like someone had latched it from the outside. That was when the panic really set in. My breathing picked up. My skin felt cold, even though I was sweating. I turned around and scanned the room again. No movement, no sound. But I knew someone had to be here. I didn't wait. I ran to the broken window near the side of the house, the one I'd peeked through earlier, and I launched myself out of it. My hands scraped on the window frame. My knee hit something on the landing, but I didn't stop. I sprinted into the woods, flashlight off, heart screaming in my chest. I veered off the path, ducking through the trees, trying to disappear. That's when I saw them. Flashing red and blue lights through the trees. Cops. 2 patrol cars creeping down the overgrown driveway. Tires cutting through grass and roots like they were responding to a call. But I never dialed 911. No one knew I was there. I crouched behind a thick oak, watching as the cruisers rolled past, right up to the house. One of the officers jumped out, hand on his gun, calling out something I couldn't hear. My gut said they weren't there for me. They were there for something else. I waited, watched, couldn't stop shaking. Eventually, I took the long way home, paranoid that someone or something was following me. Over the next few weeks, I tried looking up what happened that day. Checked the local news, police blotters, even old forums. Nothing. No reports. No updates. As if it never happened. Whatever, or whoever was in that house, it was kept quiet, buried. Just like the house itself. All I know is I never went near those woods again. And sometimes when I think about it at night, I wonder if I didn't just stumble into an abandoned house, but into something that was waiting for someone like me to walk in. The man inside the factory. A friend of mine, Carter, told me this after we went hiking last fall. We were sitting around the fire, sharing stories, and he said, "There's one thing I'll never do again, exploring abandoned buildings." Naturally, I asked why. And that's when he told me about something that happened to him and 2 of his roommates back in 2016. They were finishing up their last year at a college in Ohio. 3 guys crammed into a modest apartment on the edge of the city. Carter, Mike, and Devin were the kind of tight-knit friends who never really needed a plan. On weekends, they'd pile into Mike's beat-up Nissan and just drive. They'd explore small towns, weird roadside stops, forgotten trails, whatever they could find that wasn't filled with people or noise. One week, all 3 of them happened to have a Friday night off, which was rare. Devin had recently heard about this abandoned factory, sitting out past the edge of the city. Supposedly it had shut down years ago after a chemical spill and was never torn down. No address, just a massive structure left to rot, surrounded by empty lots and farmland. They found it using satellite view on Google Maps. Zoomed way in until it looked like a gray skeleton, buried in overgrowth. It looked creepy, sure, but not threatening. More like a rusted-out dinosaur. So they figured, why not? They parked a block away at an old gas station and walked the rest of the way. The streets were dead, quiet, like unnaturally quiet. No cars, no people. Just street lamps flickering against broken sidewalks. Carter said it felt like stepping into a memory that had been erased. When they reached the factory, it was much larger than they'd imagined. Multiple levels, twisted stairways on the outside, broken windows with spray-painted curse words. and rust everywhere. The place looked like it could collapse if you leaned on the wrong wall. The perimeter was fenced off with barbed wire along the top, but multiple spots had already been cut open. They weren't the first ones to sneak in, clearly. They ducked through a hole in the fence and made their way to a heavy steel door at the front, which was already open. From the moment they stepped inside, Carter said it felt off. The wind was pushing through cracks in the walls, making the whole building creak and groan, like it was breathing. Their flashlights barely pierced the darkness, and even their footsteps sounded wrong, like they were being swallowed. The main floor was filled with rusted industrial machines and narrow, maze-like paths between them. The three of them stuck together. Eventually, Carter wandered toward the back of the room, near a dark hallway. He glanced over his shoulder and saw one of the guys behind him. He couldn't tell who exactly, just a silhouette near one of the machines. But assuming it was either Mike or Devon, he moved forward, not wanting to get too separated, but not too worried either. He stepped through another metal door and into what looked like an old sorting area. There was a long, rust-covered conveyor belt and a catwalk hanging above, with a crooked ladder barely dangling down the far wall. He paused for a second, just shining his flashlight around. That's when he heard footsteps behind him, quick ones. The door creaked shut. He turned, expecting to see one of the guys, but when his light hit the door, there was no one. He called out, "Mike? Devon?" No answer. He took a step toward the door, and that's when he heard a crunch, the sound of a boot scraping over gravel behind him. He whipped around and froze. There, standing maybe 6 feet away in the corner of the room, was a man. Not one of his friends, not a ghost, a real man, barefoot, wild eyes, hair down past his shoulders, wearing a filthy, oversized coat. He looked feral, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. The man's lips curled into a strange smile. Then, he charged. Carter screamed and slammed the door between them, throwing his weight against it as the guy pounded on the other side. He didn't wait to think. He just bolted. Down the hallway, through the machines, lungs burning. He shouted for his friends, his voice cracking as panic took over. "Run! Get out! Now!" Mike and Devon heard him and came stumbling into view, flashlights shaking. They didn't ask questions. They just ran. They ducked back through the fence, sprinted to the car, peeled out onto the road, and didn't stop until they hit a main intersection with traffic and street lights and people. On the way home, Carter explained what happened. Neither of the other guys had ever gone down that hallway. Whoever he saw, whoever followed him into that room, had been waiting inside, hiding, watching, probably hoping they'd split up. Whatever that man was planning, Carter didn't stick around long enough to find out. And the scariest part, they never found a single article, report, or urban legend about someone living in that factory. No missing person alerts, no mentions of squatters, just silence. He said that sometimes he dreams of that man's face, especially the smile right before he lunged. Carter looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't know what would have happened if that door didn't hold. I don't like thinking about it, but I know this. There was something wrong with him. That wasn't just some guy off the street." The thing that walked the aisle. So I was talking to my cousin Eli one night. We were sitting around in my garage, just shooting the breeze, and he suddenly goes, "You ever walk through an abandoned church at night?" I laughed and said no, and he just stared at me for a second before saying, "Good, don't." Then he told me this story. It happened back when he was 16, in a small, quiet town in southern Illinois, where everything seemed frozen in the early 2000s. His best friend back then was a kid named Mason. The two of them were inseparable, especially when school let out for winter break. No classes, no responsibilities, just Xbox, junk food, and figuring out where to hang out until their parents started asking questions. One night, after a marathon of playing zombie games, they got bored and decided to walk around. It was cold but not unbearable, and the snow hadn't started falling yet. As they wandered toward the edge of town, Mason brought up a place they hadn't thought about in years, a rundown church at the end of a dead road. Everyone in town knew about it. The place was swallowed by trees, half hidden even in daylight, and it had been abandoned longer than either of them had been alive. There were always rumors, cult stuff, weird lights, people disappearing, but no one ever actually had a story. Just whispers. As they stood at the edge of the cracked road that led to it, Eli said he felt that weird itch you get behind your neck. That something's watching you feeling. But they were teenage guys. They had flashlights on their phones and nothing else to do. So they went. The road leading to the church looked like nature had been trying to erase it. Roots busted through the pavement, vines wrapped around street signs, and the woods felt too quiet. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of their sneakers. By the time they got close, the road had completely disappeared behind them. They turned around and couldn't even see the main street anymore. It was like they'd crossed into a place that didn't exist on maps. The church looked worse than Eli remembered. The stone walls were cracked and crumbling, and the wrought iron fence around it was barely visible under the overgrowth. But the strangest part? The building still looked intact. No smashed windows, no graffiti, like time had passed around it, but never through it. They found a break in the fence and slipped through. The moon lit up just enough of the courtyard for them to see the huge wooden front door, and it was slightly open. Mason pushed it gently, and the sound it made was horrible. A long, slow groan of rotting wood dragging across a warped floor. It echoed inside like the whole place was holding its breath. They stood in the doorway, just staring. Inside was a massive open. It looked like someone had just locked it up one day and never came back. Eli stepped forward. His boots echoed off the vaulted ceiling as he made his way down the aisle, eyes bouncing between the stained glass windows and the massive wooden podium at the front. Mason followed, but he kept glancing over his shoulder. Then it happened. A thud, loud, sudden, heavy. It hit like a hammer to the spine. Both of them froze. Eli spun around, flashlight shaking in his hand. The sound had come from somewhere in the room, but with the way it echoed, it felt like it had come from everywhere. "Dude!" Mason whispered. They scanned the pews. Nothing. They checked behind them. Still nothing. Trying to stay calm, they made their way toward a side door near the front. Eli opened it slowly and shined his light inside. It looked like a storage room. Stacked chairs, dusty hymn books, piles of forgotten holiday decorations. They stepped in cautiously. That's when they heard it. Soft footsteps. Eli said it was like someone walking slowly down the aisle they had just come from. The sound was unmistakable, one deliberate step after another. Thump, thump, thump. They froze, barely breathing. Through the narrow gap in the storage room door, they could just barely see into the sanctuary. The light from the moon barely touched the front row of pews, and then something moved. Just a flicker, a shadow passing through the aisle. They couldn't make out a face or even a body, just the shape of someone walking toward the entrance. Then the front door groaned again, just like before. But this time, It closed. Eli and Mason didn't move. They stood in that storage room for what felt like hours, listening, waiting, but no more footsteps came, no creaking, nothing. Finally, when they couldn't take it anymore, they bolted, out of the room, down the aisle, through the door, and all the way back down the dead road without stopping. They didn't speak until they were back in the middle of their neighborhood, gasping for air under a streetlight. When Eli finally talked about it later, he said the scariest part wasn't just that someone was inside that church. It was where they came from. The podium, the place Eli had just been standing. There were no other doors, no trap doors, no back entrance. Whoever or whatever that was, they had to have been there the entire time, watching, waiting, and maybe they weren't ever supposed to leave.